Hello, it's me, Vicky Marie, and in today's video I'm going to talk about something that I find absolutely fascinating, which is the serial killer Ted Bundy. And the reason this has sort of I won't say come to my attention, because I've been reading about this and it's been a fascinating thing to me for many years. But recently there's a new series come out on Prime Video, which is called Falling for a Killer. And it just is, I think, fascinating because it's mainly sort of interviews and talking with his ex-partner, Liz Klopfer. I don't want to get her name wrong, sorry if I've pronounced it wrongly, but she lived with him off and on. They had a long-term relationship. She was a single parent with a young daughter who was called, or is called, Molly. And to all intents and purposes, they had a lovely sort of domestic life together. In the meantime, Ted Bundy was going around murdering young women and girls. And not only abducting them, murdering them, raping them, practicing necrophilia, taking body parts home to his flat and keeping them as trophies. I mean, it just sort of amazes me how someone can compartmentalise their life so well, and then in the meantime be being this sort of super stepdad and partner, to Liz and her daughter Molly. And you can tell if you watch the Prime series, you can see that Liz is still in love with him, even though he's been dead quite a long time now. So, Ted Bundy was born on November the 24th in 1946, and he died in the electric chair on January the 24th. So the 24th seems to be a big date for him. In 1989, he was 45 years old. He died after 10 years of being on death row. Many appeals, many stays of execution. He claimed his innocence through most of that until it was coming near the end and he was realising that this was actually going to happen. And then he did start confessing, because not for any reason that he thought he wanted to help the families of his victims or anything like that, but I believe he was doing that because he thought that was a way he might get another stay of execution if he started releasing where these bodies were, and that way they might keep him alive a bit longer. But whoever was the governor at the time decided no, they were going to finally execute him, and he was finally executed on January the 24th, 1989. So he confessed to 30 murders. 30. However, it's widely thought that he's probably responsible for many more. A few failed abductions as well. One very lucky lady, Carol DeRonch, was, he attempted to abduct her, and she was very quick thinking and very lucky. She managed to escape from his clutches. And he went on later that day to murder somebody else, another girl. And so Carol always feels guilty. This is something that always amazes me about serial killers. They leave all this guilt behind. Everybody else feels guilty. She feels guilty because she escaped, and that meant he went off later that day and killed somebody else instead. So she feels guilty. Or people feel guilty because they didn't realise that he was a serial killer. Or they feel guilty because, there's so much guilt everybody else feels. Like maybe his mother felt guilty because she gave birth to him and he went on to kill all these other people's children. Very, very strange how so much guilt is created, but not to the actual killer themselves, but everybody in Other members of the family maybe feel guilty that they didn't look after their member of the family well enough, or they didn't speak to them on the phone the day before, or they had an argument, or, so many different reasons that people feel guilty, but not the killer. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about Ted Bundy here. To all intents and purposes, and he said this himself. He didn't have. I mean, he was born illegitimately in a time when that was a big thing, to be born illegitimately. But he says that he had a great family. We'll say that one thing. He's not blaming it all on his family or his upbringing. He blamed it eventually on pornography. He said that violent pornography was what made him do whatever he did. And I don't believe that either, because at the end of the day, he was exposed to whatever pornography everybody was in those days, which of course wasn't like it is now on the internet. You had to go and buy something off the top shelf, or he said, I think that he found some magazines in the bin, one of his neighbour's bins or whatever. But I just I don't get that. To me, my feelings is Ted Bundy was an absolute psychopath. Some people are just wired differently. What do you think? I mean, because in my life, I've seen people who were practically dragged up, had the worst childhood you can imagine, full of abuse, etc. They don't turn out to be serial killers. And then other people who've had, from all the intents and purposes, nice childhood. I don't think, although your childhood obviously affects you and it can affect your life and your relationships with people, I don't think it can make you go out and kill at least 30 women, and not only kill them, but rape them, perform necrophilia on them and take their head home and put it in your fridge. So really, I don't believe that. And I do think that the general consensus is going away from this. Because in the 70s, when Ted Bundy was sort of, prolific, well, it seemed like everyone was a serial killer then. It was like serial killers, I won't say just been invented, that's the wrong thing to say, had just been discovered. I firmly believe that there's always been lots of serial killers over the centuries. But of course, probably nothing was ever put together before, and then what happened in the sort of 60s, 70s, etc. Police forces started looking at these patterns more, and also connecting up with different states. For example, in America, especially in Britain, there was a time when police forces didn't work together. They all worked individually, but the advent of technology and computers has helped with that. So there's national and even international databases now where things can be checked out. And so I think that's why it seems like suddenly all these serial killers sort of popped out the woodwork. But, they were always there. They've been there. They've always been there. There'll always be people who are not wired properly, or who are wired to hurt other people, who enjoy hurting other people. Unfortunately, I think there's always been people like that, and there always will be. And they are starting to examine brains now and things like that. There's something actually missing in the brain, but I don't think they've actually come up with anything. So my own firm belief is that a serial killer cannot be rehabilitated, and they did think that in the 70s, which is the reason why so many serial killers, serial offenders of all kinds, were released to do things again, or to do worse things, because there was this general feeling that they could be rehabilitated. But I don't believe they can. I don't believe they can, because I really believe it's an illness. They can't help it. I do believe that too. I don't believe it's a choice. I don't think they sit there one day and think, right, I'm going to go out and abduct, rape and strangle a woman. I think it brews over time, and I think when it comes, they literally cannot help it. So they cannot help it, but they cannot be cured. So what we do with them, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe in the death penalty, but I can see why people were quite happy when Ted Bundy was electrocuted, except for his ex-girlfriend, of course, and his wife at the time. They were having, right, so let's go back a little bit. So he had this long-term relationship with Liz and her daughter Molly as the stepdad, who, when she's talking now, she obviously, when she looks back now, she can see little things. And actually, in the end, she did phone the police about him, because this Ted Bundy he had a Volkswagen Beetle. I can't look at a Volkswagen Beetle now without thinking of Ted Bundy, I'm afraid. And he was also, one day he was going around a sort of a holiday place, if you like, on a bank holiday in America, and trying to get chatting to women that were on their own there, and introducing himself as Ted. So that sort of, I think, well, for a man who was obviously quite clever, because he escaped detection for so long, he escaped from prison twice. He wasn't that clever that he was actually giving his real name out to people, because other people were listening, obviously. And so when it turned out that they were looking for someone called Ted, who had a Volkswagen Beetle, and then a photo of it was released as well that looked like him, she did ring up. In fact, a couple of people rang up and reported him as a possible suspect. However, Ted was a law student, handsome, eloquent, normal in every way, fitted into society. All his work colleagues thought he was great. He worked on voluntary, like, rape lines and things like that, sort of counselling people. So the police really, to be honest, they practically just dismissed him as a suspect. Or they did, let's put it this way, they had these calls, but they interviewed him, but they didn't look into it really seriously at the time. And and then she went back with him after that, so I mean, it must be so difficult, because if you've sort of got these suspicions about your partner that you love, there'll be sort of part of you that's saying, yes, this must be something to do with him. And then there'll be another part of you that's saying, no, it can't possibly be anything to do with him. And then you've got a daughter as well, that that he's been exposed to this man, but of course he never did anything untoward to the daughter. So there was one thing, when you watch the interview, the Prime Video interview, there was one time they were playing hide and seek, and he was hiding under a blanket, and when she went in and pulled the blanket off because she found him, he was naked, which is obviously completely inappropriate. But she said, I just didn't, because then they had to run back to base, if you like, because once she found him, the game was they would run back to base. And she said, I just got caught up in the getting back to the base, to win the game. And that was the only thing really that she ever remembers that was a bit inappropriate, that he was actually naked under this blanket. But if that's not really connected with other things and he didn't do anything else, it's sort of, I don't know. Anyway, so they had this long relationship. Him and Liz had this long relationship. Then when he was caught and sentenced for the attempted abduction of a girl, who luckily for her escaped, as I said earlier, but of course then she now has to live with the guilt, or her perceived guilt, that he then went on later that day and killed someone else instead. So she feels it's like survivor's guilt. And he was given some prison time. He then escaped from prison. Well, not actually from prison. He was at the courthouse. What he did. He's very clever. I mean, he was clever. You can see if you watch Ted Bundy being interviewed. To me, you can see that he's always thinking. He's never relaxed. He's always thinking. So he's planning. He's cunning. You can see that. So he'd realised that in this courthouse, near the photocopier machine, there was a window. And he would go in and, because I think he was presenting his own defence, he would go in and make these photocopies. And he was also jumping, when he'd go back to prison, he was jumping off his bunk, off the top bunk, to strengthen his knees because there was a drop from this window. So he'd worked all this out in his head all these times that he's gone off to make photocopies. He's been planning this. So he's jumping off the top bunk, strengthen his knees, jump, strengthen his knees, jump. So all that time. And then one day, he took advantage of the fact that the police, also I think the police relaxed a bit around him because he didn't give off the aura of a dangerous psychopath, he just seemed like an eloquent sort of, that's the problem, appearances are deceptive. So he took advantage of the fact that the policeman that was supposed to be looking after him was actually chatting up, I think, one of the court stenographers or whatever, and jumped out the window and legged it off to the mountains. And that was his first escape. Now, eventually he was caught because he got cold, tired and hungry, and I think he actually gave himself up that time. So he was back in prison. He saw in his prison cell that one of the tiles up above him was loose, or there was a possibility that he could get through that. So he lost weight, he stopped eating, so that he became very slim and he could get through this gap and escape that way. And this time when he escaped, he went out and killed very many girls, several girls, at Sonority House, and also a young 12-year-old girl he kidnapped, raped, killed. So that was the last time he was free. But anyway, and he was caught by accident. He was caught by accident, a bit like the Peter Sutcliffe Yorkshire Ripper case. He was stopped on a routine, it seems to happen quite often, he was stopped on a routine sort of traffic stop, and then he had a false ID and they weren't sure. Anyway, and then it turned out who he was, and so he was finally brought to justice. That happened with Israel Keyes as well, who was another serial killer who was just caught by accident. So I'd like to do a video on him one day. But anyway, the main thing I want to get over in this video is the fact that he wasn't, some mad-looking guy who lived on his own, and that everybody was frightened of. He was a normal whatever that is guy who was living this normal life, and and I just don't understand how you go back from killing someone and decapitating them, and then you take your girlfriend and her daughter out for a burger. And that, that's the sort of things that he would do. So very strange, very difficult. And I feel this total sympathy for the women that loved him. So there was Liz, and now she's the one who's talking in this documentary, this series on Prime Video, Falling for a Killer, which I just think I would recommend watching. It is absolutely fascinating. And then there's another film on Netflix which is called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile. And the reason for that long-winded title is that is actually what the judge said at his last trial where he was sentenced to death. That's actually one of the comments he made. And that's a Netflix film starring Zac Efron as Ted Bundy. What an actor. I mean, he just plays him perfectly. I've watched a lot of the footage, the true footage, about Ted Bundy, and he is spot on, I think, in everything. All the reenactments of the thing, it is so true to what actually happened. I think it's a very good film, because it is a film, but it's in a documentary style. I think everything in it is pretty much true. Uh, yeah. So now, and the other poor lady that, well, you know, I'm sort of torn between thinking the poor woman and, oh my God, are you mad? You know, because while he was in prison, and as things were sort of getting strained between him and Liz, because she was stopping believing, obviously, all these, and Liz turned to alcohol in the end to cope with all the things she was experiencing. She was an alcoholic for many years. She is now sober. I don't know how she did it. So in between the times when, you know, things, she was finally sort of cottoning on and trying to stay away from him, he'd got back into touch, or what, this woman had got back in touch with him, a woman that he knew from before, Carol Ann Boone, I think it's Carol Boone, yeah. And she believed in him. I mean, gosh, seriously, if you watch the footage, she's like, oh no, I'm not concerned about what happened wherever, you know, I don't believe that, he's an innocent man. And you just think, why are you so sure that he is? Because honestly, none of us would want to think our loved one, be it our partner or our brother or our father, or mother or sister, because, you know, serial killers aren't exclusively men, but they're more often than not men. But you wouldn't want to believe it, but there must be a part of you that would think, could it be true? Could it be true? Especially with the evidence. I mean, there was a lot of evidence. I mean, there was a woman giving evidence, you know, that he had tried to abduct her by pretending to be a policeman and saying a car had been broken into. You know, sooner or later the evidence surely mounts up. Maybe not the first thing you think, oh well, yeah, that could be total miscarriage of justice, but you know, when there's all these different ones and there's evidence at each scene, surely there comes a point where you think, gosh, could it be, I mean, I don't know, what do you think? You know, surely, anyway, she didn't. She stuck by him by some miracle. So not only escaped from prison twice, sometimes you think, what are the police, you know, what were they even thinking of? Because not only that, then she managed to get pregnant while he was in prison. So obviously there was some conjugal visits going on there. I mean, no one's ever confirmed exactly how she got pregnant. They got married. He proposed to her on the stand. In his murder case, he proposed to her, and she accepted. And apparently, there's some really old law that if you propose to someone in a court of law like that, that it's legally binding. So that was an official marriage. He just said, "Will you marry me?" She said, "Yes, I will." That's it. They were married. Next minute, she has had a baby, and that it was a little girl called Rose. And Carol Boone continued to stand by Ted Bundy until, I don't know what happened, because she's been very, whereas Liz has spoken up now, and her daughter is speaking up, Molly is speaking up, Carol never spoke about Ted, or not in public anyway, or not to the press, media, whatever. Whether she spoke privately to, because she had a son already as well by a previous marriage. Who knows? But she won't be talking now, because unfortunately she died last year in an old people's home, and she was only 70, which is really quite young, isn't it, to die in an old people's home. Maybe she had some senile dementia, I don't know, and probably, I would imagine, the emotional toll of what happened with Ted Bundy, because then a couple of, when he started confessing, well, she had nowhere to go really, did she? Because there you go, you've stood by this man all this time, insisting that he's innocent. Poor Ted, in prison for a crime that he didn't commit, well, for many crimes that he didn't commit. Such a nice guy, really, and then suddenly he starts confessing. I feel this for his mum as well, because she was devastated because she stuck by him as a mum would. You can understand more that a mum would rather than a girlfriend or wife, I think. But anyway, and then both of them, just found out that no, he did it. He did it. He admitted to doing it, and not only that, he's admitted to 30 times he did it, and they believe that the true number is much higher than that. So I don't know how that must have felt, but she was so women fell for him. You see, if you see the court cases, women going to see him, and there's like this. It's like you're scared of him, but he is attractive, and I can see that. You look at you can't. I don't even look at him and think he's not attractive. He is attractive, and it's like this. Oh no, I shouldn't be finding him attractive because he's done all these horrible things. And then the lady that was abducted and escaped. She said people were saying to her, "Are you sure? Are you sure it was him?" She said it was awful because it was like they weren't believing me. Why would I say it? Why would I say it if it wasn't me? So very interesting. I personally, I don't believe in the death penalty, but I'm not sorry that he was electrocuted because it's almost, maybe it was a bit too kind for him. Maybe he should have been left in prison, and maybe that would have been harder for him. To stay in prison, because he'd probably still be alive maybe now in his 70s, and he'd have spent all those years in prison. Maybe that would have been more of a punishment. I don't know how you think about things like that. The problem I have is with the morality of killing anybody, whether it be a serial killer, and I can understand how the parents or the family might want to kill somebody. Yourself, you might want to do that, but when the state does it, I just think it's quite cold. I don't know, what do you think? Do you believe in the death penalty for these sort of cases? I certainly don't believe in the death penalty for any other case, but for serial killers that have killed so many and that there's no hope of redemption, I can sort of see that. But generally, I would say if I had to make a decision tomorrow whether it was a yes or no, I would still go no to the death penalty, because I think it's not a mark of a civilized society. But what do you think? For cases like Ted Bundy, and what do you think? Do you think some people are just born evil? I mean, that to me, not even evil. Evil's not even the right word to say. He's wired wrong. He was born like that. He was always going to be that. I know now they're saying that there might be parts of our brains that deal with impulse. Like sometimes, how you think, you just think, oh God, I could kill them, like somebody drives you mad and you get that sort of flash. But I mean, you don't act on it. You don't get a knife and run up to them and stab them or get a gun and shoot them. And they think that maybe for some people that's lacking in their brain. I don't know. I don't know what it is. There's something, I think even they would say, like paedophiles are saying, even they would say it's an urge that they can hardly resist. It's not something, even Ted Bundy, listen to him interviewed, he didn't want to do it in that sense. He enjoyed doing it, but I don't think you want to enjoy doing it. And then I think once he started doing it, it just became an impulse that he just couldn't fight, and he was doing it left, right and centre. I mean, he really was. But then going home and having a normal life with Liz and Molly, just incredible. And of course, lots of serial killers have done the same thing. In fact, most of them. Israel Keys, who I think I mentioned earlier, that I'd like to do. I mean, he was a really scary guy, who again had a normal life with his girlfriend and his daughter. But in the meantime, he was going off doing all these horrible things. So, yeah, it's a funny one. But what I would recommend is watching, definitely, if you're interested in this sort of thing. If like me, you find it fascinating. I don't like the gory details and all that, of those things, but the psychology of these people does interest me. And it'd be interesting, can we change them? What do you think? Do you think they can be changed, or do you think that a serial killer, that's it, that they can't be changed? Or do you believe, like years ago, when they thought, oh yeah, rehabilitate them, let them out, they'd probably kill about another 5 people and then end up back in prison? Many serial killers have said that sometimes they start off with rapes and not murder, and then going to prison makes them realise that they need to murder their victims, because otherwise they can obviously identify them and they might end up back in prison. So some have said that, so I don't know. I don't think you can change them. I don't think any amount of psychologists or tablets or counselling or whatever will ever change anyone who can do that. As I say, it's not about your upbringing. It's not about, people have the most terrible, terrible starts to life and they don't end up doing things like that. So I don't believe that. I don't believe it's in your upbringing. I don't believe it's your mother's fault. I don't believe it's your father's fault. I don't believe it's, some bully that you had at school. There's not many of us who haven't been bullied at school, I think. Well, I know I was. Were you? I mean, everybody, no matter, children are horrible. They say horrible things. They pick up on and they really are quite nasty. But everybody has something that they get bullied about, So I don't think it's that they get bullied, because I think everybody gets bullied. I just think some people, it's already in them. I'm not saying that doesn't make it worse. Of course it does. I mean, if you've already got that and then all these things happen to you, then it's not going to help, is it? But I don't think it's what causes it in the first place. So what do you think? Have a look at the series. It's very interesting. And also the film on Netflix. Oh, well, there's loads of information about Ted Bundy on the internet. It's a very fascinating case. And all those poor girls, lots of girls, lots of destroyed families. That's another thing that's intriguing about serial killers. For every one victim, there's probably at least another 10 that are family members, friends, their family members. I say his mother was totally destroyed when she found out that all those years she'd been defending him. She couldn't believe that he would do that, and then suddenly he was confessing. So it's like a ripple in a pond, isn't it? So you've got the one main victim, the poor woman who's been raped, abducted, mutilated, etc. And then you've got the ripples going out of all the other people who are affected. So how many people, if you think 30 known victims, times that by 10 for the, family, friends, everybody else who's feeling bad about everything. That's 300, just if he did only do 30, so you're talking about a man who caused a lot of misery in the world. Let's hope that he had to pay for that in the next one. Okay, so thank you for watching. Hope you found it interesting. Please give me a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it. I know it's a bit rambly and that is just thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts, because it might make me look at things in a different way. I'll see you real soon in the next video, and may your God always go with you. Thank you.